Questions of Doom.
Hello, welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the channel homepage, but also, as you will see, doubtless, at the end of this video. In answering these questions via video, I aim to have the answer not only be useful to the person who has asked the question, but also anyone else out there in wonderful YouTube land who may be wondering the same thing. After all, if one person's curious, so may more people be. So, today I have received a question from Jonah72. Jonah72 asks a very straightforward, terse question, I might say. But then again, he may have spent some time inside of Wales, so who can blame him? Only joking. Now then, Jonah, you have asked, do archaeologists rebury bodies having dug them up from an archaeological site? Is it right that we rebury all the bodies that are excavated during archaeological research? Thank you, Jonah72. Well, Jonah72, you ask a fairly important question, and one which actually isn't immediately necessarily obvious to many people, and that is that yes, sometimes archaeologists do rebury bodies. This is a hazard of the trade, as it were, dealing with the remains of the dead, and where the ceremonies surrounding a burial are known, archaeologists, after having examined the body or the remains, will attempt sometimes to replicate those ceremonies elsewhere. For example, I was once involved in the excavation of a Cistercian burial ground, and the skeleton I was digging up was thought to be a monk, and I'm reliably informed that those bones, having been exhumed and examined in terms of their structure to ascertain the person's health and height, that kind of thing, they were passed on to a still working Cistercian abbey, and they were reburied using the customs of the Cistercian order. Now this raises a very pertinent point, and that is that we cannot replicate burials and burial customs for many groups. Sometimes it's actually due to law. Actually, we're not allowed, for example, to cremate or recremate cremated remains because of hazards in terms of gaseous expellation, as it were. But also as well, sometimes it can simply just be due to the fact that we don't quite know what the burial ceremonies and customs were for the different groups in the past. Now, this recently came to light, the emotive nature of this discussion in Bicester in Oxfordshire. It's spelt Bicester, but apparently it's pronounced Bicester. And that was where they discovered 8 women and a man buried in and around the remains of an ecclesiastical building. And the local church came to the conclusion that these remains should be reburied using modern Christian traditions. In other words, give them a good Christian reburial. And it caused a little bit of a stir, because the archaeologists wanted more time to look at the remains. In fact, it sounds like some of them didn't actually want the remains to be reburied. But the church insisted. Now this is despite, actually, to a certain extent, many of the ceremonies in modern Christianity, compared to Anglo-Saxon Christianity, which is when the remains were from, are very different. And also, actually, the very concept of Christianity, in some respects, rather, is altered. Nuances, for example, to do with the relationship between God and man and that kind of thing, are very different. So, even though the modern desire of Christian groups in the area was to reinter these remains, you do have to ask the question: just how valid was that ceremony? Now, in this instance, it's very easily arguable that people got so attached to those remains because they perceived that they were somehow their own ancestors. And this often happens in the south of England with Anglo-Saxon remains. People get very excited and think that these people are related to me, and I need to look after these remains as though they were my own auntie. But with, say, a prehistoric burial, you're much less likely actually to have people up in arms if they're stored in a shoebox. in a research lab somewhere. So it all really comes down to a certain extent, actually, how much we can replicate the ceremonies themselves, but also actually just how bothered people are. And unfortunately, it's human nature, or so it seems, to be bothered about those who we consider our own, and not be bothered about those who we consider to be exterior to our own beliefs or societal systems. Is it right that we bury them? In my opinion, yes. The reason for this is the people often, when we excavate them, would have had a concept of themselves being somehow eternally laid to rest in the ground. In some instances there would have been some access to the burials after death, but nonetheless the places where they were consecrated rather to those people, obviously not in the modern Christian sense. So I think it's often a good idea to try and do this, if only just to show respect for those remains that we are dealing with. In the same respect, but I ironically would be fairly uncomfortable with someone poking around in my grave and then putting me in a plastic bag and then not putting me back possibly where they found me or elsewhere. That's a very personal thing, I suppose. It's very corporeal. It's a very I suppose I spend my time studying human remains, and therefore I appreciate how important they are in that sense. But at the same time, sometimes you just can't do it. And for example, with the remains of, say, of an Egyptian mummy, or let's imagine Tutankhamun for some reason was in London. How could we possibly replicate? We can't build a pyramid for them, and we certainly can't. It wouldn't be appropriate, rather, to put them in the closest approximation in London today, being St. Paul's Cathedral. He wouldn't appreciate that, and the people of St. Paul's Cathedral probably would think it grossly inappropriate, because this person did not share the Christian beliefs, but at the same time as well, this person probably would not want to be associated with the Christian beliefs and St. Paul's. So it's a very complicated issue, really. And as I say, I get a very particular sense of these things for myself, because for whatever reason I like the idea of a resting place being respected. If that means those bones being taken out of the ground because of a supermarket being built, or even just because those remains are being studied, I completely appreciate that. But I think you must always have a respect and appreciation for the fact that you are handling human remains. And in some cases, those remains will be either so unique or so difficult to replicate their burial that it's completely possible, likely, and I think right, that they are kept for study. So I suppose if I was to die in a truly unique way, then I think I'd have no problem actually with my remains being stored and looked at for the rest of time. I suppose it's just that sense of if there's no good reason for it, I'd much rather be left alone, or be reinterred. And you'll notice that I'm talking about my own remains, because I suppose that's the only perspective from which really we can probably view this, is well, what would you want to happen? So Jonah 72, there's been lots of various issues surrounding this. It's a very emotive issue for many. People often cloud the issue with modern perceptions and modern beliefs, and as much as archaeological research is necessary, perhaps sometimes it is the fate of those remains isn't considered in always in the best way. But I think for the most part archaeologists are very aware of what they're excavating, and they try always to do the best that they can respectfully with those remains. So thank you for asking the question, and hopefully this answer is useful or interesting to others out there. And until next time, thank you very much. Bye bye.